Greetings and welcome to the Department of Tangents Podcast Season 2, Episode 5, an interview with Stay Scary podcast hosts Lisa and Yinh. The Stay Scary podcast is a silly podcast about serious horror, as described by host Lisa McGolgan. Every episode, Lisa and co-host Yinh Kiefer take a theme in horror films or horror lore, everything from insects to puberty, serial killers to doll parts, and they have a rip-snorting good time going wherever that topic takes them. The show is as much fun to listen to as it is to be on, and taping this episode was the most fun I had in an interview this season. It devolves almost immediately, and it was a pile of fun. That's right, not a pile of fun, but a pile o' fun, which is orders of magnitude higher. We discussed that age-old favorite question amongst us ghoul lovers, why horror, the origins of our own fandom, horror as a cultural touchpoint, and what actually scares us. Hint, very little, but for Lisa and Yinh, the movie Terrifier certainly fits the bill. But you can see from this episode that you don't have to be a fan of horror to enjoy the Stay Scary podcast. Here's Lisa and Yinh.
I'm Yinh Kiefer. I am Lisa's podcast wife on Stay Scary, and I am also host of the 10 with Yinh podcast.
I'm Lisa McGolgan. I do.
Too bad we can't see you.
Lisa does everything. Smile. Lisa does everything.
I don't. I do jack shit. I do fuck all. That's what I do. Fuck all. The drink for unhealthy bitches. No, I am the co-host knob tweaker for Stay Scary podcast. I have another couple of podcasts that are possibly in the works. My best friend Paula Kelly, who's out in Los Angeles, and I have been tossing around doing a podcast about cults, and then I'm thinking about doing kind of a 8-episode thing about the death of junior high. There are no junior high schools anymore. It's middle school.
Oh.
Yeah.
What is the difference between junior high and middle school?
Junior high was, I went to junior high. Junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th. Now it's middle school, which tends to be 6th, 7th, and 8th. And then high school starting at 9th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My daughter's in the throes of that now. She's in 7th grade.
But there's a whole history and a whole reasoning behind the creation of the junior high school to begin with. I want to kind of talk about that. And then since, I'm freakishly still friends with many of the people that I went to junior high school with, I kind of want to interview them as part of it. It's just it's an idea that I'm tossing around.
So I was going to ask my segue from that is that where you guys found horror? Where did you guys first start? What was your entry into horror fandom?
Oh gosh, well for me, it was that was well before junior high. My mom was a horror and sci-fi person, and very maybe a little too permissive in what her children were allowed to watch. So yeah, I've been watching horror movies as long as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, similarly, I watched a lot of horror things in elementary school. So I feel like Saturday mornings, or I want to say Saturday afternoons, early Saturday afternoons, I would watch, 70s reruns of I even forget what some of the movies were called, like Satan's Cheerleaders, or bad movies, but they were what I had. But then things like Carrie, that was like one of the first horror movies that I watched, or The Exorcist, and they struck me, and they struck my. I think that. For me, I grew up in a house where both of my parents were very close to death. My mother was in Vietnam. My dad was in the service, and met her over there. And they saw life and death situations all the time. So we talked about death a lot in my house. And my dad, I just remember one of my earliest memories with my dad, him reading me every Halloween The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. And it was like one of my favorite things, and so there I went, on my little path to macabre, and I'm glad to have this channel for all of that now. Thanks to Lisa.
I was also brought up Catholic, and Catholic is a horror show in and of itself. So
yeah, you've got all the iconography. You're looking at that every weekend, every Sunday.
Very bloody stuff.
Well, I mean, did you form friendships around horror? Did you find that when you found other people who were into the same things, that it was an easier time to be friends?
Frankly, not until probably high school for me, because in Catholic school, you're basically with the same group of kids year in and year out. None of them were particular, it was very, maybe the boys were into it. We certainly never really talked about it much. I had my sister, and, she and I would watch Creature Double Feature, which if you're from the area, Creature Double Feature was the big thing on Channel 56. So I had my sister, and, I had, cousins and things like that were into it. But as far as like really finding people that I bonded with over it, I don't really think that happened until like 9th grade or so for me.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I was able to bond with anybody over over my love of horror, because it was just too weird for a lot of people. But I still enjoyed it. And I would ask everybody that I would hang out with, hey, do you want to watch this movie or do you want to watch that? And the only ones who would really, entertain this were, boyfriends or partners at the time. And their favorite thing to do while I was watching, these movies was I would sit there like really into the movie, and then they would just like sneak up behind me and like scare me, and then they would get the reaction, and that was their fun thing to do while Yinh was getting her horror on. But yeah, it was pretty much a solitary thing for me that I did in the closet.
But I've never thought of it being like there being like a stigma on it for, especially for girls. I know that sometimes it sets you apart, but
it's a little different. It's a little different for girls, I think. And also, I was also super into serial killers and disasters, and like from an early age on, like reading about the Titanic and the Lusitania and the Hindenburg, like with almost loving attention to detail. Like my parents had, the encyclopedia sets, and I would look up that shit, and just read everything I could about it. So, I mean, that it wasn't strictly horror that made me kind of other in growing up. But, I was thinking again about junior high and 8th and 9th grade and sort of coming of age in kind of like a golden age of horror with Poltergeist and the first Nightmare on Elm Street. And I remember very distinctly when Poltergeist came to the little theater in my town, Loring Hall in Hingham, and like almost my entire junior high in there one night watching Poltergeist, and all of us screaming our heads off. And it was the most like transcendent experience of my young life at that point. People talk about, how they find Jesus, or they, they're washed in the great white light, at church camp or something. That was Jesus for me, man, was watching Poltergeist with my entire junior high school.
She had Carolyn. I'm sorry, Lisa does the voice better than I do. That was her Jesus moment. Go ahead.
There is peace and serenity in the light.
I mean, that was such a big cultural touchstone for a lot of people. I don't know if, even if, the horror kids were kind of shunned at some point, like people would talk about Poltergeist. There was that, oh man, there's that scene where his face turns into ground beef, or there's all these skeletons swimming around in the, there were very specific points of that movie that became reference points in junior high when about the time that came out.
Yeah,
I mean, that was something we all kind of even the people who weren't huge horror fans kind of shared in that.
You all talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like Psycho talking about the, you know, the blood spiraling, the shower drain, you know, just like that iconic scene that everybody talks about even before you've seen the movie.
Yeah.
Or The Exorcist, you know, with the head spinning around, or you know, the pea soup vomit.
Yeah. It was all very fascinating to me, all of those things. I remember going to, you know, slumber parties, or having a friend invite me over, and I would go, ooh, ah, when all of that stuff would happen, and they're going, oh, why is she into this? And I didn't get invited.
I laugh. That's
yes.
my
yes.
problem. I laugh my ass off at stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's my defense mechanism. Like, I laugh.
Yeah. And did they say to you, because I heard this, why is she laughing? What's wrong with her? You know, and you know, sometimes you get invited back to the parties, and sometimes you just don't. Then you just, you know.
I mean, there's an acknowledgement of human frailty there that exists in both comedy and horror. That slapstick thing, you know, when somebody gets their head torn off in a horror movie, it's sort of like give them in the Three Stooges when their eyes get poked. There's that you know, we hurt. There's that acknowledgement of it, and when you see it on the screen, you're like, ah, yes, that happens to, you know.
So Nick, is
REM about it. Everybody hurts.
Is Freddy Krueger then like Moe from the Stooges? Is that what you're kind of saying?
Kind of. I think he was probably whoever was writing him was probably thinking along those lines. Especially when you get past the first one.
Yeah, he didn't really become slapsticky. He really didn't become like the Weisenheimer horror villain really until like the second one. And then he had like all of like the little catchphrases and stuff. I think he was much more menacing in the original.
Yeah. Did any of this back then, and does it now, does any of this actually scare you? Any of these movies? Does any of this actually make you jump or make you scared, or is it something else? Because most of the time for me, it's sort of a wonderful, creepy fascination. Not a lot of it actually makes me scared.
Art the Clown scared me. Art the Clown was scary to me, and Lisa was able to get him on Stay Scary in one of our episodes. And the stuff that scares me, I talked to you guys a little bit about this over Facebook Messenger, but I watched a movie last night called Unhinged with Russell Crowe, and that scared me because I think that can actually happen, where somebody, you know, you've got the angry white man getting really angry about some kind of road rage incident that happened with a woman, and then just going after her. And because people go after each other nowadays, that can actually happen. Will somebody like Art the Clown come after me? No, but it was well done. It was so well done, I think, Terrifier, that it did scare me. So fictional stuff, not so much, unless it's done really well, or stuff that can actually happen. Those are the things that scare me.
I have a high threshold, you know, not a lot squicks me out in horror. I remember being genuinely frightened / fascinated by the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I loved that concept of not being safe in your dreams. I thought that was really interesting. As far as, you know, if anything's really, really frightened me in horror, I would have to agree with Yinh and David Howard Thornton in Terrifier. And in fact, one of the reasons why I reached out to him and we actually have become friends since is that I watched it and I was so, because clowns don't bother me. I don't have colorophobia. Like I'm not squicked by clowns in the least, but his performance in that movie was so fucking unsettling that I had to seek him out and make sure that like he was like a semi-normal dude, which he is, and we share a lot of the same political views, and he is genuinely one of the sweetest people I have ever met, which I think is actually the case. And we talked about this on our episode when we interviewed him, is that when you go to horror cons, the people that you meet, the performers and the effects artists and just in general, you're never going to meet like a nicer group of people than when you go to these horror cons. They're always just genuinely happy to see you. But yeah, Art the Clown was really fucking awful. Terrifier 2 coming soon. I think what's more frightening to me, and one of my favorite movies of all time is called A Face in the Crowd, and it's from the 50s, and it's not a horror movie, but it may as well be. It's a Patricia Neal and oh gosh, why am I drawing a blank on the guy's name?
Oh yeah, and Andy Griffith.
Andy Griffith, yeah. So Andy Griffith plays this like populist, everyman type scumbag called Lonesome Rhodes. And Patricia Neal's character is a radio producer, and she discovers him in a jail and turns him into this kind of monster. And it's a very prescient movie in that it definitely the cult of personality, but it also, I mean, it predicts Trump and Trumpism in a very frightening way. So that movie to this day still, I mean, as much as I love it and as fascinating as it is, and if you want to see Andy Griffith like really be somebody entirely other than Andy Griffith, you need to watch it. It's movies like that you know, it can't happen here. Well, yeah, it can. That I think scares me a lot. Movies like that where you know, it's very plausible. And there was another movie that really bothered me too. It was also kind of a horror movie. It was called Bug. And I think we mentioned it in the episode when we were talking about bugs, where they're on drugs and they're, you know, convinced that they're, you know, that they've got meth or something, and they're tearing their skin apart and stuff like that. Like that kind of stuff like scares me too. And anything that has to do with, you know, the horrors of addiction and what can actually happen with addiction, because that's very real for me. And it's, you know, stuff like that like genuinely scares me. Horror to me is almost, you know, an escape from the shit show, you know, the shit show reality.
I agree.
I mean, the podcast, this Stay Scary podcast, you've described as, see if I get the tagline right, as a silly podcast about serious horror.
Yes.
And there's a lot of laughter on it. That's the vibe that you go for on the podcast.
Right.
There's a lot of humor in it, even describing the depths of the sickest things we can think of.
You mean like Human Centipede, Nick? Remember when we talked about Human Centipede?
Yes. Yes. What made that your approach to a podcast?
Well, when I was originally thinking of doing a podcast, and that's our mutual friend Felicia Ryan had her podcast. Hi, Felicia, and sort of talked me into taking the podcast class with Heather McNamara. And that's where I met Yinh. You know, I knew I wanted to do something to do with horror, because my favorite podcasts tend to tackle the worst of human foibles in a humorous way. You know, most people know my very favorite podcast of all time is Last Podcast on the Left. In fact, I've got my last podcast on the left, denim trucker vest draped over my chair here. Oh, it's dope. You got to see it. It's really cool. Look at that.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I want that Satan to bend me over.
Yep.
Just like in the video.
I want to. Yeah.
I don't think I could pull off a denim vest. I
didn't think I could
not?
either. I didn't think I could either until I bought it, and then I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna be a trashy murder junkie in this vest. Yeah, but so getting back to my point is that I definitely wanted it to be sort of humorous. You know, because I think fandom podcasts tend to sometimes be a little dry and a little snobby and a little like comic book store guy. And, you know, I wanted to take it from the perspective that it's fucking fun. You know, horror is fucking fun. It's funny. And when you find like your people, as you were saying before, you know, were you able to bond with people? I haven't really been able to bond with people until later on. And in creating this podcast and realizing how many of my friends and sort of people in my universe are willing to get down with horror and laugh and be wholly inappropriate about it. You know, that's
the one good thing about the podcast is that even if whoever we have on isn't a horror aficionado, there's ample room for participation, because I don't think that we stick to just the like technicalities in the movie or in the plot, but we also take whatever is happening in the movie and we're talking about very relatable things. You know, we talk about, you know, the tropes in horror and how they apply to current events or things that happen to us personally in our lives. And I mean, the first episode I was on was, that was a screamer. That just changed, you know, everything for me, because I had Melissa Van Ham as a co-guest.
The menstrual one. Was it the menstruation one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was just incredible, because if you have guests that are unabashedly themselves and no fucks given about what they're talking about, I mean, I think that makes it very relatable to whoever's listening, you know, and they just laugh along with us. I mean, as long as we're having fun, I think everyone else is having fun.
I hope so.
I think
there's and I don't want to say that it's every horror fan, because it's obviously not every horror fan, but most of the people that I've met in the horror writing community have been very open. They have been very friendly, sometimes in their own way, because they're not necessarily always sort of outgoing as much, but they were very welcoming to me when I first started a few years ago to go to these sort of meetings of horror writers around New England to try to get into that scene. And they do seem to laugh a lot. I know there's also there's a segment of horror that's sort of bro-y and not quite as welcoming. But I sort of hope that the horror community is more the people I know and less that aspect.
None of those guys that worked in the comic store. It calls everybody plebes that doesn't know everything about each issue of whatever.
No, I mean, that's certainly not been my experience in meeting other horror fans. And like I said, you know, the cons are, you know, just, full of like generous people. But, you know, it's just my fear is always, you know, I don't want to create something that people are going to feel intimidated by, you know, because I have people who are just like, oh, well, I don't listen to your podcasts because I'm not a horror fan. I'm like, dude, you don't have to be a horror fan. You really don't have to be a horror fan. Trust me. That's, you know, and if you come away with maybe wanting to watch something great, if you know, spend an hour just like, you know, having a giggle, then, you know, that's all I can hope for.
Well, having been on the podcast, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to listen to. It's a lot of fun to be on. But I will say that it brings out my comic book guy instincts, because whenever you tell me, oh, do you want to be on this and this is going to be the theme, then it's hard for me to balance the sort of the rest of my life against wanting to watch everything to that theme and just explore that theme, because that's sort of how I make room for things, writing about things and talking about things in interviews. That's how something gets space on my schedule. So it's just a lot of fun when you say, like, we've done we did Bugs was one, and we did medical horror. Just watching every movie that I can think of to try to prepare for that it's a fun kind of gauntlet to run through, because it gives you that particular, it focuses me. And as you could tell from the last 2 minutes of me speaking in a large block, I sometimes lack focus.
Well, but that's what we like. I mean, we have sort of our all-star episodes, like, you know, you and Jonathan Woodard, and you guys, you know, you do the research and you bring it and you speak about things in a really great way. But I think that's offset by me because I'm just such a vile, foul-mouthed, disgusting person, awful human being. And then Yin kind of tempers that with her very peaceful bullshit hippie.
Lisa's seen me not be so peaceful sometimes.
No, she has not been, and we've also seen her dirty ass feet. The last episode with Johnny, when you showed your feet in the camera, that was something else, man. That was some Earth Mother unnecessary visuals.
I fixed my feet, Lisa.
Oh, good.
I went to get a pet. I've been vaccinated. I got both sticks.
Oh.
So yeah, because I do massage therapy and work in a physical therapy office. So that kind of needed to happen. But I went to the nail salon, and I swear the poor man, I had a man working on my feet, and he got the cheese grater out. He's going to town like for a half hour on each hoof. And I was like, I felt so bad. He was getting sweaty. It was just not something that I wanted to be doing on myself. And I don't know how he does it all day, but he ended it. And he was like, when you go home, you put Vaseline on your feet and do that every night. And I was just like, I'd never been given homework by a nail tech before. This was the first time ever. So yeah, Lisa's not exaggerating about my cloven hooves.
Yeah, it was just bad. It was a bad thing. It's a good thing we're not a video podcast. That's all I'm gonna say.
Okay, do you want to see what they look like now? They look so much better.
God,
they're
Yin,
like
God, Jesus Christ.
I mean,
it's all that yoga. I'm so limber.
I mean, it is its own unique horror, so it fits.
Oh my gosh, we should do an episode on cosmetic horror.
Okay.
Cosmetics in horror.
Sure.
I was thinking you could probably do one entirely on syringes.
Yep.
For the vaccination theme, because I could think of a few places where they come up.
Syringes and cosmetics. Like there's got to be a Botox horror movie out there.
Somewhere there's got to be you would think for every theme you could think of that there's a horror movie, but I was on a podcast with another friend of mine, Mike Vago, who has a podcast called Why Is This Not a Movie, where you sort of pitch him things that you think should be a movie. And we talked about why maybe there is a movie, but I don't know of it yet, that is a sloth attack. I haven't seen a sloth horror movie yet. That's a big void in the market, I think.
So one of the running gags on Stay Scary is that Lisa basically educates me on a lot of stuff. She's like, you know, the big sister on this show. And she told me that there is a porn for everything.
Yes. And
she's right. Every time we have an episode, I'm like, I wonder if she's right. Is there a porn for this thing?
Yes.
And there is. And it seems like there's a horror thing for everything too. It's like porn and horror. Both of them have, it's so many different branches.
And both of them have their stigmas.
Right.
However you're getting your rocks off, man. I mean, whether you just want that rush of adrenaline from the fight or flight instinct from watching a scary movie, or, you know, the rush and then the self-hatred that happens after you watch porn.
Yeti porn or whatever. Porn.
Yeti porn. Yeti porn. Ready or not, Yeti or not, here I come.
That almost sounds more like maybe a Norwegian phrase or something that doesn't mean what you think it means. Would you, like, if you go to a traditional dinner and they say, would you like some Yeti porn?
Yeti porn? Or it sounds like
IKEA.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like a table in IKEA that you have to put together with a fucking Allen wrench.
Yeah, just put the pizza down on the Yeti porn and we'll watch the movie.
I thought that was a Davenport. No, no.
The last thing I wanted to ask was, when are the next episodes coming out, and do you have themes for them picked out yet?
Good question. I mean, I was kind of derailed this month. But yeah, we definitely are going to get back in the horror saddle. We've got some, ideas bouncing around. So probably in the next couple of weeks, I'd say we'll start producing episodes again. Yeah.
Yeah. And 10 with Yinh season 2 is almost, I have 3-4 more episodes to record until I can say I'm done with the particular season that I'm on. Then I can take a hiatus. I have the next season planned for recording in July, and then I'll just batch record all of those and then just release them. And that just frees up my time. It gives me time to do all the other things that I'm going to be doing.
Yeah, we're sort of a Stay Scary is sort of like a fly by night.
No, I don't think. I think I call it more of an organic process.
It's an organic thing. It happens very spontaneously. We'll come up with the idea and then we'll talk about,
Yeah.
we have like our little stable of unstable geniuses that we can call upon to to jump in on an episode. You or Van Ham or Johnny that are willing to jump in and just kind of talk about whatever.
Yeah. And sometimes they're timely, sometimes it's it ties into things that are happening or things that have been released, like the Terrifier episode was definitely, Terrifier 1 was out, Terrifier 2 was in the works and just was
and that episode was specifically about clowns, but it ended up being quite a bit about Terrifier.
And I think that Lisa's been pretty resourceful in trying to figure out, who's available, what topics are appropriate for that time, and then, going into it then. So I call it a more organic process. It's not, it's not like.
Yeah, we don't have we don't have a schedule. We don't have a spreadsheet. We tried at one point to have a spreadsheet, and then it just kind of got jettisoned because it's just not the kind of operation we are.
Yeah, and it's not like we make any money from it. It's not like, so really, I mean, it's fun. It's always been meant to be fun, and that's not something that we can rehearse. That's not something we can plan. It has to be natural.
Yeah.
Thanks again to Lisa and Yinh for the horror pep talk. I'm looking forward to the next batch of episodes. You can find Stay Scary on Apple and Podbean and iHeartRadio and various other podcast aggregators. The show is also on social media, on Instagram at Stay Scary Podcast and on Twitter at Stay Scary Pod. You can find Yin's podcast, 10 with Yinh, at all of those same podcast locations. As always, if you liked this episode, please consider subscribing on Apple, Google, or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And find more material at www.departmentoftangents.com. And if you do like it, please tell your friends, tell whoever you think might enjoy this. Please spread the links. Thanks for listening.
Neil Young!